Let's geek out on some gear, shall we? Today we're going to be checking out Eddie Van Halen's gear through the years. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Gear Through the Years, the segment on my channel where I go from start to finish on an individual artist's career, checking out all their gear from the very beginning all the way to present day, and or the final time that they picked up a guitar. If you're brand new to this segment, or if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much. Leave a comment down below on what artist you want to see me do next, and I'll do my very best to make it happen for you guys. So I've been waiting to do Eddie Van Halen for a long time, and I've been really excited for this for a number of reasons. First reason, Eddie was my first and favorite guitar player, and up until recent years, he was always my favorite guitar player. 2, Eddie made it cool to mod and mess with your stuff. He was the first guy. Now, I don't know if he was the one that was the first one. He probably wasn't, but he was certainly the guy that made it the most popular and cool to mess with your guitar or your amplifier, being able to mod it, change out the pickups, change out the color, change the neck, etc., etc. Eddie made it cool in the late 70s and early 80s, and even till this day. And lastly, there's a lot of lore and mystique and a lot of wrong information with Eddie's gear, especially in the early years, which is a nice segue into 1978's self-titled Van Halen album. So let's start off with what we know definitively. Now, Eddie in 1974 got a Boogie Bodies neck and body for $50 and $80, put it all together, painted it black, spray painted it white after he taped it, and the rest is history. This guitar had a regular Fender tremolo system as well as a Gibson 335 pickup. The story goes he dipped the pickup in paraffin wax to get rid of all the extra unwanted feedback and noise and gave it a more smoother, kind of creamier sound. The pickguard was also homemade. He cut it out himself, smoothed it out with a soldering iron, threw it all together, and then now this is the infancy of the Super Strat. A couple other pieces we know is he first used a 1976 Ibanez Destroyer. Now this guitar was originally white and was also a full-on, full-shaped Ibanez Destroyer guitar. But like Eddie always did in the early days, he had to mess with it. And so first he took a chainsaw to this guitar and turned it into the shark shape, and then he painted it red. This guitar was used on You Really Got Me and the opening track, Running with the Devil. Reason why I know this is you can hear the pickup selector being cut and knitted out on You Really Got Me, and the opening string rake to Running with the Devil was done behind the bridge on this guitar. Now in the studio, he also had an old Daniel Electro laying around, as well as it looks like another Boogie Bodies type of guitar, but I can't confirm what exactly these guitars are. They were just always laying around in the early years. Now, let's talk about the amp. Now the amplifier people argue about all the time, and even to this day still argue about it, even though I'm pretty sure Eddie has said exactly what it is. After compiling all the information doing my research, I found out that it was a 1967 or 1968 Marshall Plexi SLP 1959 model. Now what made this amplifier unique and interesting was the whole Variac dilemma. The story goes that Eddie Van Halen bought this amplifier in an LA Times ad, and then when he plugged it in and turned it up all the way to 10, everything was on 10, it was dead quiet. And the reason was it was set to UK voltage or 240 volts. So Eddie realized he could use this amplifier at full volume and it wouldn't blow up, but it was just dead quiet. Now he just needed a way to turn it up. So he hooked up a Variac to this amplifier and he turned down the voltage and made it louder. And it makes sense. If it's set to 240, you start to turn it down, it gets louder. If it was originally quiet, turn it down, it'll start to match the intended voltage. Makes sense. A lot of people think he turned up the voltage and that's why it gave it that super hot sound, but it's actually not the case. Eddie was always lying to people that were trying to figure out how he was getting his sound. He was telling people that he was doing the absolute opposite of what he actually was doing with the Variac. Just turned down the voltage and it made it louder. So basically, the Variac was his volume control. And lastly, the last pieces of gear on the self-titled album was a Marshall 4x12, mic'd up with a 57, a Phase 90, and a couple tape delays. And that was pretty much it. Whew. Alright, now Van Halen 2. Now that we got the first album out of the way, I do have to say that from Van Halen 1 all the way through For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, the amplifier side of things with Eddie Van Halen is almost non-existent. It's really strange. It's almost like nobody cares about, Van Halen 2 all the way through OU 812. It's all about that first album. And what I mean is there's not a lot of definitive knowledge about the amplifier that Eddie used. It could be inferred that it's the same amplifier, but I can't confirm, so I don't want to say that it was one thing or not the other. There's a few different variances through album cycles and different touring cycles, but for recording, I can't 100% confirm what amp was used on Van Halen 2 all the way through OU 812, but let's just assume it was probably the same amp in the first album or a little bit different variations. So now that we got that all out of the way, let's just talk guitars all the way from the late 70s all the way through the late 80s. So, Van Halen 2, Bumblebee, 1979. Eddie Van Halen wanted a guitar with rear routed electronics, and therefore he didn't have to have any of the top of the guitar routed out, and he wanted it to be a little bit easier to work on. This guitar also had a black headstock and black painted back of the neck. Eddie didn't like this because he liked the feel of a natural neck, so he would always constantly swap out this neck, put it on different guitars, and it was constantly in the rotation of all his other guitars. Bumblebee also originally came with a DiMarzio pickup, but was later switched out for a Gibson Path. And right around this time in 1979, the Frankenstrat got its iconic paint job. It got the red on top of the white and black. A lot of people, I'm sure, do know now, but back then and back even before the internet was a real thing, people didn't know that it was the same guitar as the first record. A lot of people thought it was a different guitar. Thought there was a white and black and a red, white, and black. No, it's just the same guitar with just a different paint job and no pickguard anymore. The black headstock neck that was on Bumblebee originally was on this guitar from time to time during this time, as well as it had a Floyd Rose installed in about 1980. Speaking of 1980, let's talk about Women and Children first. Now, on the album was the Ibanez Destroyer, the original one from 1978. I think it was like a 74 or 76. That guitar was in the rotation from time to time, but really wasn't used that much. He was also seen live using a Gibson Les Paul during this time with the neck pickup taken out completely, and it looks really, really terrible. Here's a picture of it. Another guitar that surfaced around this time during Women and Children First was the Charvel/Daniel Electro Star guitar. Now, this guitar has a Daniel Electro neck, and it can be inferred that it was actually the original neck from that guitar that was laying in the studio in late 1977. And then one random guitar that I found was this blue and red guitar looking thing. I only found one picture of it. I don't even know what this is, but I thought it would be cool. I'd throw this in there. But the main guitar used on the tour cycle and recording of Women and Children First was in fact his iconic Frankenstrat. All right, fair warning, 1981. Now, real quick, I do want to talk about one guitar in particular because it wasn't originally used that much until this point in time. This guitar is called the Snake guitar. Now, the story behind this guitar is the Ibanez Destroyer that Eddie basically ruined when he took the chainsaw to it. He was really upset with that guitar, and so he wanted another one. So he contacted Charvel and then created the Charvel/Daniel Electro guitar. Now, this guitar was used pretty much in the mid to late first album cycle, but it really just wasn't used that much. There's only like one or two pictures of it, and it was since forgotten later on. Rather than getting rid of the guitar and not using it anymore, Eddie contacted a luthier and a furniture maker to create the Snake guitar. Now, basically what happens, they took that Charvel body, cut it all out, made it look like a snake and a dragon fighting and the dragon eating the snake, repainted it, and then threw on the iconic black headstock Charvel Strat style looking neck on this guitar, and this guitar could be seen on 1981's Guitar World magazine. Another guitar that was used around this time was the Bye See Ya Later and or Unchained guitar. Now, this guitar later became the Rasa guitar, but it was originally the guitar used for Unchained. It was in the drop C sharp tuning. There was also a mini Les Paul floating around during this time, as well as a Kramer double neck, which was featured around late 1981, early 1982. But again, the main guitar used for Fair Warning on the recording and the tour cycle was the iconic Frankenstrat. Okay, Diver Down, 1983. Now, this album cycle is actually pretty boring because there really wasn't too many other guitars used. The only thing that was really changed to the Frankenstrat was there was now a Kramer neck used on this guitar. And then the Kramer double neck was also used a lot during the tour cycle of this album. But apart from that, Diver Down really has pretty lackluster gear in terms of what Eddie was using during this time. There wasn't any real big changes, just a neck swap, and that was pretty much it. Okay, 1984. This was a big year for Eddie Van Halen because this is when he got his first signature Kramer guitar. Now, I do in fact think he got it in late 1983, but it wasn't really made popular until 1984 came out. This guitar is very similar to Bumblebee in that the electronics were rear mounted, just one pickup, and then it has a big giant hockey stick looking headstock. Moving right along to 5150. Now, this is when Eddie's tone changed drastically, and a lot of people think it was because it was the sign of the times, like the 80s were starting to be a little bit more electronic music and not necessarily like the classic rock in the 70s. But also, Sammy Hagar was a huge influence on Eddie's tone. The main guitar for 5150 was in fact the Kramer 5150, but he was also seen using a Steinberger guitar, and this can be seen used on Lie Without a Net. Now, when I say Eddie's tone changed a lot during the 5150 era, the reason being is because he started to make his guitar a stereo guitar. back in the day when he was recording, he'd have all his guitars on one side and then all the effects on the other side, and Eddie hated this. He hated that if like you were sitting in your guitar and your speakers were blown out, or if you only had one speaker working and Eddie wasn't on that side, all you would hear was the reverb and delay. You wouldn't hear his actual guitar. All you would hear is Michael Anthony. So now he was starting to use a stereo guitar panned on both left and right, and then he was also using harmonizers to create a little bit more of a saturation and unique sound. Now for the tour cycle of 5150 and OU812, the amps again really aren't talked about much, as well as during the recording sessions, but I did find this picture of Eddie backstage in 1986 with a whole lot of Marshalls and Marshall cabs. Speaking of OU812, now Eddie's gear was pretty boring during this time, but he was starting to use prototypes for later years and when his gear would really explode onto the mainstream. And what I mean was he was using his Kramer 5150, but he was also using a prototype of his future amplifier as well as a Soldano SLO 100, but it wasn't really used for the recording and for the tour cycle. And he was also starting to dabble with some Music Mans as well, which will come very soon. So for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, now I love the sound of this album, and this album was the beginning of the explosion of Eddie in terms of his gear that was used. In 1990, Eddie became endorsed by Music Man. He got his signature guitar, which had a basswood body, sometimes had a quilt maple top, a couple DiMarzio pickups, and a Floyd Rose, and it was a beautiful guitar. And now, for collectors, is one of the most sought after items on like Reverb and eBay and stuff like that. The amp used on For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge was in fact a Soldano SLO 100, and I love the way this thing sounds. One other piece of gear that was used prominently on this album cycle was a wah pedal. And I've heard a lot of people say that Eddie felt pressured because of people like Jerry Cantrell using a ton of wah, and the grunge era starting to become a much more popular thing. And so Eddie really didn't use that much wah before, but now all of a sudden on For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, wah was everywhere. Pretty cool. And then two pieces of fun little bonus gear is that Eddie also had a Music Man double neck, as well as he was using a drill during the beginning and during the solo of Pound Cake. Okay, in 1993, the amp that changed metal forever, the Peavey 5150 was released. Now this amplifier is responsible for all the modern guitar tones in present day, in my personal opinion. So real quick, I do have to say this because a lot of people don't know this. And when people say Peavey 5150 block letter, they're not talking about the blocks on the face of the amplifier. They're talking about, if you look at the original 5150, in the bottom right hand corner it says EVH in block letters. But there was another company, I can't remember what the company was, not important, reason being is they were going to sue Eddie Van Halen and they were going to sue Peavey because their logo is very similar to theirs. So rather than going through a lawsuit, they just changed the block letter EVH to the signature Eddie Van Halen signature and put it in the bottom right hand corner. And so then when people say script Peavey 5150, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the signature. So if you say Peavey 5150 block letter, you're talking about the original EVH logo that was later discontinued. Fun fact. Alright, this brings us to Balance, 1995's Balance, the last album that Sammy Hagar was with the band. The guitars used on this album was the Music Man EVH signature model, the Peavey 5150 was the amplifier, but the original OG Marshall I heard on a Guitar World magazine was also used during this time and for the recording. So then in 1996, Eddie left Music Man because at the time Music Man wasn't a big enough company for Eddie, so he went with Peavey and then had an endorsement with Peavey from 1996 through 2004, and they created the Peavey Wolfgang. During this time, Van Halen put out Humans Being a Greatest Hits, as well as Van Halen 3 with Gary Cherone, and Eddie also around this time got the Peavey 5152. In 2004, the reunion tour came around. This is when I personally saw Eddie for the first and only time when Sammy Hagar was with the band. Really cool show. Eddie was a mess, but you know, a lot of great memories with my father. He was using the Cherry Burst Peavey Wolfgang with a Sustainiac in the neck position, as well as the Peavey 5152. But in 2007, Eddie Van Halen reinvented himself, remarketed himself, and created the EVH 5153. Now these amplifiers are killing it in present day, and although there's been a ton of different models, you have the Stealth, the black one, the white one, the EL34 one, the Lunchbox, Lunchbox 2, all the combos, etc., etc. Anyway, although these are so many different models of this amplifier, they're still killing it and they're still relevant today. Very cool. Similar with his amplifier, Eddie teamed up with Fender and created some of the most amazing modern guitars today. Whether it's the Made in Mexico or the Made in USA Wolfgang with stainless steel frets, these guitars are some of the easiest and most comfortable to play, and I personally love them. Whew, that was a long one. It was very challenging, very daunting, but I think I've knocked out Eddie Van Halen's gear through the years. How do you guys think I did? If there's something that I missed, that's something that's major that you guys want to talk about, leave it down below and we'll talk about it. Again, guys, It's very hard to talk about every single piece of gear and guitar. I just try to knock out all the main ones. But again, if you think that I missed one that absolutely needs to be in this video, leave it down below and we'll talk about it. Again, if you want to see me do another one with your favorite guitar player, leave it down below in the comments and I'll do my very best to make it happen. Guys, I'm out of here. A huge thank you to all my patrons and everybody watching at home. Stay metal. Happy Halloween if you're watching this. Well, I hope you had a great Halloween because this will be out tomorrow. Happy Halloween. I love you guys. Stay metal. And I'll see you guys next time. Later.